好的，欢迎回来。过去2年间，新兴市场国家的股票市场大多疲弱。不过，从今年2季度开始，全球基金经理重拾对新兴市场股票的热情，特别是亚太地区的股市。我们也知道，最近2年间，监管部门大幅提高了 Q 费和 RQ 费的额度。有了久违的热情和通畅的渠道，外资会不会加大对新兴市场，特别是中国 A 股市场的投入呢？为此，我们采访了管理着数千亿美元资产的美国奥本海默基金公司新兴资本市场的高级副总裁莱佛伦兹。
去年9月，上交所、深交所和中国金融期货交易所分别组团赴美加、日韩、欧洲、中东等地进行路演，寻求海外基金通过 Q 费渠道进入中国股市。不过，到目前为止，中国 A 股市场的外资占比仍然不超过2%。在众多希望进入中国资本市场的机构投资者当中，管理近2000亿美元资产的奥本海默基金位列其中。莱佛伦兹管理的新兴市场基金曾创下年均34%的收益率，目前托管资产达340亿美元。
Nowadays, people find it's really hard to benefit from the A-share market. The stock markets in Japan, in the US, and in Hong Kong, they are now doing good, but the A-share is sluggish. What's your view on the future of A-share market?
In the last 5 years, I think investors have become very myopic. They're not long-term investors anymore. They're really concerned about yield. And what they're trying to do is move away from bonds, which have no yield in most of the world, into these sort of high-quality dividend-paying companies. And frankly, the A-share market doesn't have a lot of those companies. The A-share market is comprised of capital-intensive, heavy industry, commodity-oriented companies, steel companies, construction-related companies. And I think all over the world, it's not unique that those companies just haven't had a lot of investor enthusiasm for the last few years. China is still a very domestic retail market in terms of ownership and trading patterns. And the fact is, I think that the investor base in China tends to be what I consider a growth junkie kind of investor base. So they're really concerned about the second derivative of growth. And of course, as we know, for the last 3 years, the second derivative of growth in China has been poor. I think they may be missing out on one of the largest opportunities probably of this decade in terms of China. I'm extremely bullish about Chinese equities because all great bull markets have to start with this wall of worry and skepticism. And I think that there's no market in the world that probably has more skepticism than the Chinese A-share market at the moment. And I think a lot of good things could happen.
People start to worry more about China's local government's debt ratio and the shadow banking system. As a foreign investor, what's your view on the risk factors related to China?
The growth numbers continue to be relatively weak and disappointing, but nobody's paying attention to the underlying quality of that growth, which is getting a lot better. You know, the reality of the fact is the last decade in China had 2 big growth drivers. The first big growth drivers was the huge expansion of the export base. And China, of course, in 10 years became the largest exporter in the world. That's pretty much done, or at least until global conditions get better, that's done. Then, the last 5 years, as that started to soften, the next big growth engine was the reflation, the infrastructure, the construction, the lending boom after the crisis. And I think in terms of growth contribution, what you're seeing at the moment is that's pretty much done. You know, we saw in the last numbers that investment as a fraction of GDP has gone down below 40%. Well, that's a really good thing if you can continue to grow at, you know, a little less than 8%, and the composition of that growth is improving radically.
The Japanese yen has depreciated a lot in a very short time. Do you think China will face stronger competitors in its export sector? And what will be the driving force for its economic growth in the future?
The world is in a very difficult circumstance right now. I'm not trying to suggest it's not. The US recovery is relatively uncertain. Europe has not resolved any of its problems, and now Japan, of course, is trying to reflate by debasing the currency. I think worries about competitiveness in China are not completely without merit. In terms of Japan, I think China is not the principal threat of a much cheaper yen. It's Koreans that have to worry because the overlap in terms of competitive position is much more significant in Korea. And what you're really seeing also in terms of China in the long term is you've seen a huge migration in terms of the quality of the export base. China, one of the biggest things that's happening at the moment people don't talk about is a massive relocation away from the labor-intensive things like textiles and shoes. The very beginning of most export industries now are booming in places like Bangladesh, in places like Vietnam, and even to some extent in places like the Philippines and Indonesia, because China's moving up the value chain. And I think that's a normal, healthy thing.
在采访中，这位关注新兴市场的基金经理坦言，即便是在经济放缓的环境下，如果中国能注重增长的质量，提升制造业等关键领域的价值链，那么不管对于改善基本面还是增加企业盈利能力，都有不小的帮助。而资本市场的投资者也终将获得回报。